So on that note, I want to hand it over to Aki from Sheffield, and we're so pleased to have you with us, Aki. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and you'll be speaking about your research on the aversion to inequalities in subjective well-being, and it's an online survey of the UK public. Over to you, Aki. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invite, and I'm going to talk about this work, which I've done with Paul Dolan, whom I'm sure you all know. Special thanks to Senet Leung, who helped us set this survey up and collect the data. So let's start with the background. We want policymakers to maximise population subjective well-being. We want people to have higher subjective well-being rather than low subjective well-being. But then what about inequality in subjective well-being? Because the social objective function may be inequality averse, meaning that we have a social objective function that is increasing in people's subjective well-being, but also penalizing or decreasing in inequalities thereof. Which means that we're thinking about this, the specification of a social welfare function. It's not about how people value their own, what happens in their own happiness function, but we're talking about how to aggregate across different N people if their own well-being or utility or subjective well-being is captured separately. We have to put them together. What is the functional form to put it together? And obviously what I'm putting to you is that it's probably not simply additive. And I'm thinking about Atkinson 1970, where he proposed the equally distributed equivalent income, which I'll come and give a formal definition of in the next slide, which basically says more income is good, but if there's income inequality, then the social objective is dampened down a bit. There already exists an empirical literature in health where we specify something called a health-related social welfare function, and we have gone out and found out the extent to which people would like to see social welfare, health-related social welfare, penalized for existing inequalities in health. And McNamara et al. Is a literature review that reviewed what's been done in the UK. So UK public are in general inequality averse or averse to inequalities in health, where health is measured either in survival or quality adjusted survival. They tend to be across socioeconomic groups, which is a bit of an anomaly, which I won't go into here, but it's leading off from the public health interest. So the interesting thing is when you talk about income inequality, it's about inequalities in income. But a lot of public health interest and policy interest in health inequality is not inequality in health at the individual level, but inequalities in average health by socioeconomic groups. But that's something that's there in the background, but not what I'm going to talk about today. So let me give you a formal definition of equally distributed equivalence. And what we're talking about is the concavity, it's a convex social indifference curve. Imagine a two-party case. Horizontal axis is the well-being of one party, vertical axis is the well-being of another party, and imagine that the current situation is 3.9, and draw a social indifference curve through that distribution. So the equally distributed equivalent of that 3.9 is, given a baseline unequal distribution, an equal distribution that is as good as the baseline distribution is your equally distributed equivalent. So your given baseline unequal distribution is that 3.9 there, and your equally distributed equivalent in this particular example is the place where that indifference curve intersects with the diagonal. So that's an equal distribution that is as good as the 3.9 where you started off from. So as I've already said, it's not about the individual utility function. It's not about how the horizontal axis is determined, but it's how we aggregate and get the social indifference curve, which means that we can't rely on stated preference data or self-reports or actual states. It's about how people value or how people judge different distributions. The aim of this study and the null hypotheses are, first of all, to examine aversion to inequality in subjective well-being held by members of the UK public by type of subjective well-being measure. The main null hypothesis is that people are not averse to inequality in subjective well-being, and the additional hypotheses are inequality aversion does not depend on the type of subjective well-being measure, of which we have 4, the ordering in which the subjective well-being measures appear in the survey, of which we've got 2, the direction of titration in which the trade-offs happen and inequality is quantified, and we've got 2 directions, and the alignment on the left-hand side, right-hand side of the choice tasks, of which we've got 2 variants. And I'm going to explain each of these variants, or the methodological variants. So we're going to have 4 modules to represent 4 subjective well-being types: life satisfaction, worthwhileness of your life, happiness yesterday, and sounds familiar, but the last one is a bit different. It's being free from anxiety. So the ONS4, the anxiety one, is flipped, and we didn't like the idea of the metric, the score, going in the different direction depending on the module. So we consistently say subjective well-being is measured on a scale of 0 for worst and 10 for the best well-being, and so that the A, anxiety one, is flipped to freedom, or being free from anxiety. And each task is a choice between an unequal baseline and an equal alternative. So we have 2 groups of people of equal size, and in the baseline we have a distribution where one group gets level 3 or score 3 of subjective well-being, and the other group has 9. The alternative is going to have equal subjective well-being, which is 3-3 or 4-4 or 5-5 or 6-6. And so you can, if you remember the 2-dimensional graph that I showed you, you can imagine that we've got the 3.9 there and the diagonal, the 3, 4, 5, 5, and we're trying to see the point, we're trying to locate that red social indifference contour. People are offered a choice between the unequal option or the equal option, or to indicate indifference between the 2. And people are asked to use a social perspective. Please imagine that you are a policymaker. You're making a recommendation or a choice between the policies in capacity as, imagine that you are a policymaker. You're not actually either of these groups. You're not part of either of these groups. It's not about what you want for yourself. Methodological variants, the 2 orderings. So variant number 1 has life satisfaction followed by worthwhileness, happiness, and then free from anxiety. Variant 2 has a slightly different ordering, but the remaining 3 are the same, and the only difference is where to put the anxiety thing. So between the ordering variants, we would expect the anxiety one to be freedom from anxiety to be affected, if there is to be an ordering effect. Maybe life satisfaction will also be affected, because in variant 1 it appears first, and variant 2 it follows free from anxiety. But the other 2 should be affected less by the module ordering. And then task ordering. So this is fixed for each respondent. The upwards variant starts from, the alternative starts from 3-3 and finishes in 6-6. So they do 4 tasks, 3-9 versus 3-3, 3-9 versus 4-4. The other ordering is downwards. So they start from 6-6, 3-9 versus 6-6, 3-9 versus 5-5. And we want to see whether the ordering in which we ask things is going to have an effect. Now, on hindsight, we could have included one that said random, or random looking, random appearing ordering, which doesn't have a pattern, but we didn't do that. And then finally, there's a left-right or right-left alignment where the baseline, the unequal baseline 3-9, is going to appear on the left-hand side of the screen, or it's going to appear on the right-hand side of the screen. So the things that we're worried about is that we know that if you titrate, if you give it a choice and then go 1 notch down, 1 notch down, 1 notch down, or 1 notch up, then it can delay the switching point, the boiling frog story that goes with it. And the right-left is also known that people use the right-hand side option, or maybe I shouldn't generalize too far as people, but it's known that there are lots of instances where people use the left-hand side as the reference against which to judge the right-hand side. So if the right-hand side needs to be better to be chosen, whereas the left-hand side can be chosen if it's no worse than the right-hand side. Now, I don't know if you do Arabic, it goes the other way around, but anyway. And so those are the things that we were interested in. And we had a few survey variants. We had 8 survey variants, 2 module order variants, 2 left-right alignment, 2 task ordering upwards and downwards, and that's 8 variants. So we say, if we say variant 1R6, it means it's ordering variant 1. So it starts with life satisfaction. Right left is R, so the 3.9 appears on the right, and 6 means starts from 6 and it goes downwards. I mean, you don't have to remember the ordering, but the code, but that's the way we looked at it. And each respondent answers 16 choice tasks. Each survey has 4 modules, so all the respondents get the 4 well-being types, and each module has 4 choice tasks against 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. So that's the way it's all built up. The social perspective is activated or introduced by this instruction. Please imagine that you are a policymaker and need to choose between 2 policies that affect 2 groups of people. The groups are the same in every way, and you are not in either of these groups. The graphs below illustrate how these groups will respond to a subjective measure, say life satisfaction question, under 2 different policies. If that's the case, would you choose policy A or policy B, or are they equally good? So this is an example of 5-5 versus 3-9. Each module, and I'll explain the subjective measure, subjective well-being measure, is flipped. So it represents the module, the subjective well-being type of the relevant module that the respondent is in at the time. The survey consists of it's an online survey hosted on Qualtrics. There's an informed consent section, and then there are 4 modules, where each module consists of self-reported own current subjective well-being in the subjective well-being measure of the module. So if you have the life satisfaction module, it says, tell us your life satisfaction on a scale from 0 to 10. And then it says, self-reported own worst subjective well-being. So please imagine in your life, the episode when you had the worst life satisfaction, and tell us the life satisfaction that you were experiencing at that point. The reason we ask this is because a lot of people have pretty good life satisfaction. So, and especially if they're answering an online survey, obviously then they're not going to be in a very, very bad state. But we need people to be able to imagine what it's like to be life satisfaction level 3. And so rather than to tell them, this is an example of life satisfaction 3, we invited them to try to think of the worst thing, the day when they thought their life satisfaction was lowest, and try to imagine what that was like. And I haven't brought the descriptive stats for that, but that helps people gauge, how bad is the life satisfaction of 3, or how bad would it be for me if I had a life satisfaction of level 3. And then the 4 choice tasks, which I've been talking about, so upwards, downwards, left, right alignment, using the life satisfaction, using the subjective well-being measure of that module. And then there's 4 modules. So let's repeat it. And then we collect information on demographics like age, sex, education, further background questions on personality and social attitudes, followed by a tick box and free text feedback exercise of things like, there were too many questions, or I didn't understand what was going on, or this was boring, or this was interesting. And that was it. It was an internet panel from Prolific, so we specified an age sex quota, and we were aiming for 800 members of the UK public. And it happened in the innocent days of before the pandemic. So that was the idea. And when we actually did it, we managed to get 970 respondents. This is the breakdown by the, the 8 survey variants, and you can see that they're roughly similar. And there's 96, I think, individuals who consistently refuse to give any background information. And other than that, most people told us they are. And in the regression, we do run a few regressions. There's 3 individuals who don't report binary sex, and two people who are below secondary. So we're trying to decide what to do with them for the regression, whether to keep them there or to think of another way of making use of their information. But anyway, that's a sample. Patterns of choice. So for each module where they give 4 responses, so that's their 4 responses, so they compare 3, 9 against 3, 3, 4, 4, whatnot. Let's start from an easy one. So if somebody says they're indifferent between 3, 9 and 6, 6, and they prefer 6, 6, and they prefer 3, 9 above 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, sorry, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, then they're utilitarian. If somebody wants the 6, 6, but wants the 3, 9, they switch from the equal path to 3.39 at some point, but with just one, they go directly. So let me give you an example. 3, 9 and 6, 6, they choose 6, 6. But 3, 9 and 5, 5, they choose 3, 9. So they no longer want the equal one. So they go straight from the equal one to the unequal one. Or they might say they're indifferent at 5, 5, and they choose the 3, 9 at 4, 4. Those two types are categorized as decisive prioritarians. So they switch straight from the equal to the unequal, or they switch from the equal to indifferent and then unequal. And the reason why I call them decisive is because some people use hesitant. I call them hesitant. They say 6, 6, but indifferent for 5, 5, and 4, 4. But when we get to 3, 3, they say no, 3, 9. So they are prioritarian, but they're not very decisive. There's a range where they're indifferent. So I call them hesitant prioritarians. And so if you have two or three indifferents in between, we call you hesitant. And egalitarian Rawlsian means that you are indifferent between 3, 9 and 3, 3. All you care about is the worst off, so you don't care what's happening to the other party. 3, 9 and 3, 3 are equally good. Backward bending means that you have a strong preference for 3, 3 rather than 3, 9. So at that point, the indifference curve is backward bending or is tilted, and that's a major no-no for standard microeconomics. But it is known that some people will have such a preference. Some people will put backward bending under not logical, but I'm putting it under logical because you can. Microeconomics won't like it, but you can have a narrative that explains what's happening. You can also have inequality seeking, which will mean that you prefer 3, 9 over 6, 6. And then where are we? Uncertain. So you can have indifference all the way. It's not very helpful, but it's too strong to say that they're illogical. They don't have a strong preference, or they don't know, they're just uncertain. Then there are the inconsistent people who go the wrong way, meaning that they start off with the 3, 9, but they end up with the equal, which is something that we can't explain, or they switch back and forth. So they go 3, 9 and then on the diagonal, and then go to 3, 9 and then come back to the diagonal. We can't explain that. And then there are a few people who are missing. So that's the pattern. And good news is that the modal pattern is the prioritarian decisive. So most people start by choosing the 6, 6, but they don't stick with the diagonal all the way, assuming it's a downward projection. Yes, Michael.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you to re-explain what prioritarian decisive was again.
Yes, so prioritarian means that you fall somewhere between the Rawlsian and the utilitarian. And if we follow the downward trajectory, so I'm going to stick to the explanation that compares 6, 6, 5, 5, 4, 4 against 3, 3, 9. If you compare 6, 6 against 3, 9, if you're a utilitarian, you're indifferent. But if you're a prioritarian, you would want 6, 6, strong preference for 6, 6 over 3, 9. By the time you get to 3, 3, you're going to have a strong preference for 3, 9 rather than 3, 3. So we expect you to switch from the diagonal to the unequal somewhere. And that's prioritarian. if you switch in one go, so if at one point you want the equal and the next step you want the 3-9, or you switch via indifference. So at one point you have the diagonal, the next one you have indifference, and then the next one you want to go for 3-9, then we say you're decisive because you've switched fairly quickly. It's a relative thing. Whereas hesitant means that you say indifferent twice, if not 3 times. So you don't quite tell us exactly where your switching point is. You're saying it's somewhere between here and here. And we're calling that prioritarian hesitant. So it's good news for us that most people are or the largest group is prioritarian, which is something that we as economists can understand. And now I'm showing you the distribution of the logical responses. So I'm just looking at the logical people, not logical people, logical responses. And at 3-3, we expect most people to choose the 3-9, which means that, sorry, in the coding here, I'm sorry, coding is not very good. I've coded -1 as prefers the equal outcome, 0 is indifferent, and +1 is prefers the unequal outcome. So the green in this means that they prefer the unequal. But at 3-3, when you compare 3-9 versus 3-3, we expect most people to choose the 3-9. By the time we get to the bottom right-hand panel, 6-6, we expect most people to choose the 6-6. So most people will be blue, which is what we see. As we go from 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 6-6, the green diminishes and the blue takes over, which is what we expect. The 4 bars within each chart are the 4 well-being modules. So does the pattern depend on whether we're talking about free from anxiety or happiness or life satisfaction or worthwhileness? There seems to be very little difference. It looks like happiness invites a bit more utilitarian or a bit less Rawlsian than or backward bending than the others. So that's that. And then the next one is by direction. So if it's upwards or downwards, and this is showing that the patterns are very similar, but with the upward one, so starting from 3-3, we have fewer people with backward bending preferences. Or to put another way, with the upward one, we have a bit more inequality seekers. With the downward, the 2 bars, the 3 means upwards starting from 3-3, and the lower bars, 6 means starting from 6-6 and coming downwards. So there's a slight difference depending on the direction of the trade-off. And then I'm going to show you a few equally distributed equivalents. So this is the equally distributed equivalent by module, where that red, dark red shows you the Rawlsians, and that olive color is the utilitarian. So to the left of the Rawlsians, the dark blue, I've given them an EDE of 2, but I don't really know. All I know is that it's less than 3. And then at the right-hand side extreme, the maroon, the light brown, they are the inequality seekers, and I've given them an EDE of 7, but I don't know. All I know is that it's larger than 6. The majority of respondents fall between the Rawlsians and the utilitarians, and that's the distribution you have. And as we've seen before, the happiness item seems to attract a bit more stronger inequality aversion. When we do it by sex, men and women, it seems that there's very little difference between what they want. Age. So these are the 3 age bands that we used. And it's clear that younger people have, there's a higher proportion of younger people who have a backward bending social welfare function. So they are much more strongly inequality averse. They are more egalitarian than Rawlsians. On the other hand, they don't have a lot of inequality seeking people. It's the older ones, the 56 plus, who have the highest proportion of inequality seeking respondents on the right hand, those who have the EDE of 7. Now, because these people are randomly allocated to the methodological variants, these should be what they are. But what we've done next is to put the results into regressions to see what is it that's actually doing this. So we've run a few regressions. One is to determine why some people are giving a logical response, whatnot. So there's a binary logistic model to explain giving logical answers. And then there's an ordered logistic to explain the ED, the equivalent, equally distributed equivalent values. And I gave it a try to see if it would work, to do a bit of multinomial logic to explain the categories. Are you a prioritarian, a utilitarian, a backward bending? Explanatory variables is always the same. There's an interaction between the module and the module order. So which of the four modules is it? Multiplied by, is it the life satisfaction first one or the free from anxiety one first? And then direction, downward, upward, interacted with the right left alignment, and demographics. So I'll give you a very quick look at the regression results. First of all, logical pattern. Are you going to give us a logical response? In this, yellow means positive effect, red means negative effect, bold means significant at 5%, and italics, non-bold, is significant at 10%. So what this means is that, let's start from the 0 and the 1 at the bottom. If your life satisfaction out of 10 is either 0 or 1, you are more likely to give a logical response. This is something that I wasn't expecting. And yeah, at significance 5%. 2 rows above, age, if you're in the younger group, you are less likely to give a logical response at 5%. I was not expecting this either. And then the one at the top means that the times 2, order 2 means that this is the one where free from anxiety appears first and second module is life satisfaction. This seems to be the most confusing ordering of the modules that we give. So there are some individual features and the design features that affect who's going to give a logical answer or who we're going to regard as not being logical. The location of the EDE, start from the age, 18 to 35, bold and red, means that EDE is smaller if they're young. So they're more inequality averse if they're young. The yellow HP2 at the top means that the happiness module, when it appears in variant 2, is associated with a larger EDE, so less inequality averse. I can't quite explain that one. And the rest, it comes from a multinomial logit where prioritarian precise is used as the baseline. And I'm not going to show you all the patterns because some of them only have less than 100 people in it. But the utilitarian one, so relative to being a prioritarian, you are more likely to be utilitarian if you're given those two variants. Happiness, if you're given the order variant 2 and you're answering the happiness module or the worthwhileness module. Again, I'm not too sure why that's happening. The next cell, 3 times 2, that's saying that you are more likely to give a utilitarian response if you're engaged in an upward direction variant. If the questionnaire you're doing is of the upward type, and you have the unequal option on the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side. You're more likely to be utilitarian if you're male. You're more likely to be utilitarian rather than precise prioritarian if you're male and not female. Those who are hesitant, the males are less likely to be hesitant prioritarian compared to precise prioritarian. So what it's saying is that amongst those who are prioritarians, those people who use 2 or 3 indifference options tend to be female. Inequality seeking, they are less likely to be young, they're less likely to be given a downward direction option, and it's more likely to happen in the FA2. So FA2 appears a few times it's probably difficult. This is where the free from anxiety is the first module that they see. And then backward bending, again, FA2 appears there. And LS2 is life satisfaction appearing directly after free from anxiety. LS1 is the first one that they ever see if they do variant 1. So the backward bending, it's interesting to note that there are no respondent characteristics explaining backward bending. Backward bending is entirely explained by the module. So these are quite exploratory yet, but anyway, those are what's happening. And so there are, I'll do a summary here. I think I'm going over time now. The sample, so the take home, the big headline is the sample suggests UK public is averse to inequalities and subjective well-being. The main null hypothesis is rejected. But it does seem to have effects by framing. So the module order and task direction, choice alignment, each have some effects, which doesn't affect all of them. So we need to unpack a bit more what's happening. Regarding the respondent characteristics, the one that is we want to think about a bit more is the respondent age seems to have an effect in such a way that younger people are more inequality averse. But they also were more likely to be deemed illogical. So I was wondering whether there are two types of young people. Some young people are just speeding through the survey without paying too much attention. Maybe they might be too comfortable being on the internet. I don't know. We can match them up with their social attitude questions to see whether they're coherent, whether the quantitative answers they're giving can be coherently matched with their qualitative responses to the social attitudes. But for discussion, probably for this group, is the non-incentivized stated preference nature of the survey. So when we ask people of what people think, you can get them to do things where it's incentivized. So you say you don't want to cheat, then let's us give you an exercise whereby you get a reward for cheating. Would you actually cheat? This is non-incentivized, but there's a reason why it's non-incentivized, because you can't incentivize eliciting people's objective function at the social level. You can incentivize an exercise that tries to parameterize individual utility functions, but not a social welfare function. And it's also a bit uncomfortable, perhaps, because this whole interest in subjective well-being comes from a suspicion of decision utility. And what we're saying here is this is decision utility about the distribution of experienced utility. And what kind of, there's a bit of mental acrobatics going on here. But given that we're interested in the W, not the U, we can't have a revealed preference or real data. No, real data is the wrong word, but we can't have revealed preference, or we can't have experienced happiness regressed on the inequality. However, if you can bite the bullet and if you can swallow this, then I'm not saying this study is, but this is a literature. This is an area where there could be massive policy implications. So once we're happy with a given social welfare function, so if we say it's going to be a constant elasticity substitution, social welfare function, whatnot, then we can use the EDI that is elicited to calculate the inequality aversion parameter of the social welfare function, which can be used to calculate the marginal rate of substitution at any given point. So we can say, given where we are, is it better to improve the subjective well-being of people who already have a reasonably high subjective well-being, or should we sacrifice some subjective well-being of the better off and try to improve the subjective well-being of the worse off, even if it's a lot less cost-effective to do so? What is the level of overall subjective well-being that we're happy to sacrifice in order to improve, in order to reduce the inequality? So that's what this is trying to do. So I'll stop here.